Of all the tragedies inside Five Nights at Freddy's, Charlotte Emily's is the one that hurts the most once you know the whole story, because she never stopped trying to save people even after the night she couldn't save herself. She was the first victim, the first soul to come back, and the only one who spent decades making sure everyone else got to rest before she ever considered resting herself. This is the complete story of Charlotte Emily, and it is one of the saddest things buried inside this franchise, so get comfortable, because we are going to go through all of it tonight. Charlotte Emily wasn't always the supernatural anchor of this haunted timeline. Before she became a ghost in the machine, she was just a child, an innocent girl growing up in the shadow of her father's inventions. Her life ended quickly in 1983, during the early years of the franchise. That period was defined by a corporate transition, a quiet time before the brand grew into a global name. Her death wasn't a simple background incident, turning into the true point of origin for every tragedy that followed. Her early years were spent inside the quiet warmth of Henry's development workshop. She watched her father handle the tools, her young mind fascinated by the gears and levers that brought wood to life. She didn't view the mechanical frames as scary monsters, treating the early characters like festive members of her own household. This innocent relationship with her father's craft made her final fate outside the restaurant feel incredibly cruel to those who knew the family. The choice to build giant characters for family restaurants came from Henry's desire to delight his daughter. He wanted to create a magical world where her imagination could find a physical home on the stage. He spent his nights refining the vocal modules, ensuring the melodies were soft enough to comfort a child during a busy afternoon shift. Charlotte was the true muse for his engineering career, inspiring the designs that would eventually dominate the local entertainment market. Her sudden disappearance from the living world set off a slow domino effect that shattered the community for decades. It initiated a pattern of systemic child murders, industrial cover-ups, and structural failures that the company legal teams couldn't fix with financial capital. The boundary between life and death dissolved on the night she died, establishing a metaphysical precedent that altered the nature of the machinery. Her name became a memory that the corporation tried to bury beneath its legal paperwork. She wasn't a random casualty in a generic horror story, standing as the direct catalyst for the spiritual resistance. Her lingering presence ensured that the crimes of her killer would eventually face a final accounting in the furnace. Before the legend grew, she was just a little girl who wanted to stay close to her father's workbench, completely unaware of the darkness that was growing beneath the floor tiles of the diner. Her story is the foundation of the entire franchise. Part 2. Henry Emily and William Afton. The structural roots of her tragedy lay inside the volatile business partnership that founded the brand. Henry and William established their alliance in the late 1970s, combining their contrasting skills to open Fredbear's family diner. The synergy was highly profitable from their first week of operations. Henry worked as the creative genius who pioneered the spring-lock frames and audio cue routing, while Afton managed the financial logs, public relations, and corporate logistics from his central desk. This professional alliance was fundamentally toxic, defined by a dark envy that grew inside William's chest over the years. Afton lacked the innate talent to create sentient machinery, watching his partner build expressive characters with a resentment that altered his sanity. He didn't want to just copy the blueprints. He wanted to inflict a thorough psychological ruin upon the inventor's household. His ambition mutated from simple corporate friction into a focused crusade to destroy everything Henry loved. Henry missed the early warning signs of this psychopathy because he stayed focused on his technical labor. He noticed his partner's cold reactions to normal family interactions, but he dismissed the behavior as a simple trait of a driven businessman. He put his total trust in the paperwork, leaving William to manage the venue parameters without human surveillance. This blindness was the first critical mistake of his career, providing a shield for a predator. The two founders built a system that would eventually become a graveyard for the local neighborhood. While Henry spent his afternoons balancing the weight distributions of the heavy stage performers, William was calculating how to exploit the blind spots in the facility layout. The partnership created a dangerous machine that ran on a script of corporate growth, masking the human malice that was sharpening its knives behind the kitchen door. Charlotte grew up in the middle of this silent tension, walking through the corridors of the first restaurant while the founders argued over the budget. She didn't understand the danger hiding behind William's polite smile, treating her father's partner as a trusted family friend. The business expanded, but the foundation was already rotting from the inside, setting up a betrayal that would tear the family apart before the first season concluded. The public face of Fazbear Entertainment during her childhood was a calculated facade of wholesome entertainment. The bright decorations, festive aesthetics, and innovative mascots created a warm illusion of absolute protection for the guests. Parents left their toddlers near the main stage without a single doubt, trusting the corporate uniform to secure the perimeter. It was a comfortable environment where suspicion felt completely unnecessary for the local community. Beneath this commercial surface, the venues were plagued by catastrophic structural hazards that management chose to ignore. The spring-lock suits carried severe technical liabilities, their internal clips vulnerable to moisture failures that could crush a human actor in seconds. The executives kept these safety reports hidden from the local inspectors, prioritizing their daily profit margins over a real overhaul of the hardware. The company operated in a regulatory void. This environment provided the perfect evolutionary ecosystem for the crimes William Afton wanted to commit. The company's obsession with avoiding lawsuits created an operational blind spot where systemic human evil could function entirely unchecked by the staff. If an employee noticed a strange variance in the maintenance logs, the legal team used non-disclosure contracts to silence the rumors before they reached the town. The business model protected the predator. The architecture of the pizzerias assisted this concealment, featuring narrow corridors and unmapped storage areas that sat outside the camera network. Henry designed these layouts to maximize floor space for the arcade cabinets, completely unaware that he was building a maze for a serial killer. The festive rooms became a hunting ground where a child could vanish from a party in seconds without triggering an alarm on the console. Charlotte lived in a world where the adults were entirely focused on the mechanics of expansion, leaving the real danger unmonitored. The corporation manufactured an image of childhood joy to secure the community's trust, turning the restaurant into a trap. This systemic neglect allowed the malice to mature safely in the shadows, waiting for a single stormy night to break the peace of the Emily family forever. Part 4. Why Charlotte Matters More Than People Release Charlotte Emily isn't just an ordinary entry in William Afton's rising body count. She stands as the definitive cornerstone of the entire mythos, a foundational spirit whose narrative trajectory recontextualizes every game in the series. Her death serves as the direct bridge between her father's paralyzing guilt and her killer's obsessive descent into the scientific study of soul remnants. Her story is the lens through which the true rules of possession are revealed. Her lingering consciousness is the singular force that prevents Afton from achieving total dominance over the timeline. She doesn't just haunt a corner of the building out of random anger, she actively organizes the spiritual resistance across multiple generations of pizzerias. She becomes the keeper of the lost souls, channeling their chaotic confusion into a targeted fight against the uniform. Without her intervention, the missing children would remain helpless. Her presence alters the mechanics of how a soul interacts with the machinery, introducing a moral purpose into a universe defined by slaughter. She rejects the animalistic loops of aggression that dominate her companions, operating with a calculated clarity that allows her to bide her time. She understands the long scope of the war, tracking her predator through fires, liquidations, and corporate granary openings over 40 years. The game showed that her narrative arc didn't conclude until the final pizzeria fire dissolved the bonds of the remnant. She carries the emotional weight of an entire generation of casualties on her back, acting as a spiritual mother to those who were failed by adults. Her tragedy is the moral core of the franchise, a counterweight to the selfish ego of a killer who wanted to live forever. Understanding her role changes how a listener perceives the early security guard simulators. The night shifts aren't just technical glitches in a free roaming mode, they're the active battlefields of a war she manages from her prize counter. Charlotte matters because she's the original witness to the crime, a child whose refusal to drop her mask eventually dictates the terms of her killer's permanent punishment in hell. The tragedy unfolded on a stormy night in 1983 outside the brick walls of the original restaurant. A group of cruel children closed a heavy emergency door behind Charlotte, locking her out of the festive celebration. She stood alone in the dark alleyway, her small hands pressing against the cold glass as she watched the warm dining room inside. Her cries for assistance were completely drowned out by the loud music. Inside the venue, the initial line of safety infrastructure failed due to a simple physical block. Henry designed a prototype machine called the Security Puppet to track his daughter's unique green wristband signature automatically. However, the same mischievous children placed heavy presents on top of its gift container, pinning the lid down securely. This design vulnerability completely neutralized the facility's highest tier security asset during a critical hour. The software inside the trap machine registered her departure, its tracking indicator flashing as Charlotte moved away from the door coordinate. The internal gears twitched against the weight of the boxes, but the physical constraints prevented an immediate deployment on the floor. The automated protector stayed stuck in the dark room, its safety loops running uselessly while the storm grew worse in the alley outside. Charlotte retreated toward the local garbage bins to escape the wind, her clothes soaked by the heavy rain pools on the concrete. She felt completely abandoned by the adults who were managing the kitchen shifts, her isolation total as the hours advanced. The bright lights of the restaurant windows mocked her distress, leaving her without a defense against the darkness that was pulling into the narrow driveway. This sequence highlights the core thematic failure that defines the architecture of the brand name. A father put his total trust in a digital program to protect his family, ignoring the reality that a physical machine can be broken by playground bullying. Charlotte stood in the mud, a helpless target whose safety net collapsed because of a pile of cardboard boxes and an unmonitored exit point. Part 6. William Afton's murder of Charlotte A. purple sedan pulled into the narrow alleyway while Charlotte stood weeping beside the trash containers. The vehicle's headlights illuminated the falling rain, its engine idling silently in the dark corridor behind the kitchen. William Afton stepped out of the driver's seat, his mind unhinged by an evening of intoxication and professional malice. He found his partner's daughter alone in the storm without a guard. Driven by a desire to inflict the ultimate form of emotional agony upon Henry, Afton closed the distance without hesitation. He didn't use an elaborate golden suit disguise or a clever child luring tactic, executing a raw act of psychopathic cruelty in cold blood. The crime was intensely personal, born from a burning spite that ignored the corporate consequences of the action. He took her life in the dark. This initial murder stands as the official point of no return for his character arc within the timeline. He wasn't experimenting with soul remnants or searching for immortality yet. He was simply destroying his partner's heart out of sheer ego. The simplicity of the crime separates it from his later actions, marking his transition from a jealous business partner into a real serial killer. He left her quiet body hidden beside the dumpster bins, returning to his sedan before a single employee noticed his absence on the floor. He drove away into the shadows of the town, believing he escaped detection because the safe room sat off the official blueprints. He didn't leave a paper trail or a weapon behind, convinced his position protected him completely. The crime was completed within minutes, leaving nothing but a tragic trace of evidence in the mud outside the exit door. Afton believed he deleted his partner's future with a single strike, unaware that the spiritual residue of his malice was already altering the environment. He returned to his corporate duties, leaving the family restaurant contaminated by a tragedy that would rewrite the rules of mortality. Security machine inside the venue finally tipped the heavy presence off its box after a prolonged structural struggle. Its optical sensors initialized instantly, tracking the green wristband signal that was fading from the local area registry. The marionette rose from its container, gliding toward the automatic exit doors to execute its primary safety protocol before the shift concluded. The moment its slender frame crossed the threshold into the outdoor alleyway, the heavy rainstorms began to destroy its internal components. Henry didn't build a waterproof seal for the uninsulated wiring, causing the circuit boards to spark violently as the water entered the shell. The sequence turned into an agonizing mechanical failure, the hydraulic lines losing their pressure under the rain. The machine dropped its smooth movement loops, its joints twitching as the digital code fought against a terminal system crash. It fell onto the wet concrete floor, forcing its long limbs to execute a desperate jerky crawl through the mud to maintain its tracking coordinates. The white mask was streaked with water pools, looking like a face covered in dark tear tracks. It dragged its ceramic torso across the pavement, its motors grinding together with a loud screeching sound that echoed in the alley. The program inside the Sipu refused to turn off the tracking routine, forcing the broken limbs forward despite the catastrophic water damage. It was a race against a total hardware failure, managed by a basic safety subroutine that lacked human flexibility. The marionette reached the dumpster zone just as its internal power line died completely, its movements slowing to a final stop. It found Charlotte's body in the dark, its long arms wrapping around her remains in a useless, delayed posture of protection. The protector arrived after the crime concluded, its technical talent ruined by a storm that its creator failed to calculate. Part 8. The rain and the broken machine, the security puppet, collapsed directly over Charlotte's lifeless body, its systems smoking from the water damage. The wet fabric of its blue torso pressed tightly against her clothes, creating a physical convergence under perfect metaphysical conditions. The storm continued to flood the alleyway, the rainwater acting as a highly conductive conduit that linked the child's body to the iron framework. The raw agony of her final moments stayed active within the local space, a powerful emotional residue that couldn't dissipate into the void. This intense energy fused directly with the melting plastic and copper wiring of the short-circuiting endoskeleton. The moisture supercharged the physical connection, transferring her life force into the central processor before the cells cooled completely. This interaction established the foundational rules for how possession functioned across the entire history of the franchise. It wasn't a magical spell or a code error, but a physical binding driven by a child's sudden suffering and an iron conductor. The material retained the pain of the crime, turning the emotional residue into a functional power source that could run without electricity. Imagine being the manager who found that ruined machine hugging a dead child in the mud the next morning. The company technicians processed the scene as a simple hardware failure caused by rain exposure, completely blind to the spiritual fusion that occurred in the dark. They separated the bodies, but the real connection stayed locked inside the iron bones of the doll. The rain washed away the physical evidence from the alley floor, but it couldn't clear the spiritual stain from the hardware. Henry's design shortcuts created a conductor for his daughter's grief, turning his favorite safety tool into a vessel for her consciousness. The small girl left her human identity behind in the dumpster zone, her soul entering the ceramic mask before the police arrived. Charlotte's consciousness woke up inside the security machine during the quiet hours after the local police finished their walkthrough. She didn't float through the corridors as a detached poltergeist, her soul completely replacing the animatronics factory code from the inside. She took total control of the slender frame, turning its thin limbs and blank features into a physical manifestation of her spirit. The white mask didn't look like a generic corporate prop anymore, its purple tear tracks reflecting a human sorrow that no technician could erase with tools. She looked through the black eye sockets, her vision adapting to the digital display of the internal sensors. She realized her human body was gone, and she was locked inside a mechanical shell that her father helped build. She didn't strike out in random panic against the walls, her advanced awareness allowing her to analyze the environment with a quiet intelligence. She accepted the heavy burden of her new existence, turning her attention toward the dining hall to monitor the actions of her killer. Charlotte became the first true sentient supernatural force in the history of the company, an independent mind in the dark. A machine originally built to passively scan plastic wristbands was instantly overwritten by a child's protective spirit. She could move her limbs without a battery connection, her internal motors driven by an old pain that refused to clear its files. She stayed inside her prize container during the day shifts, a silent watcher who kept her eyes fixed on the entrance doors. This transition turned the marionette into a formidable judge within the building, a spirit that operated outside the default constraints of the software. She knew the face of the man who left her in the rain, and she was determined to use her mechanical strength to manage the danger. The protector woke up with a real identity, closing the book on her human childhood to begin her watch. Charlotte's death sets a completely separate metaphysical precedent from the later tragedies that defined the brand. Unlike the 5 victims who would later vanish during the summer rush, her body wasn't stuffed deep inside a dark costume by a killer. Afton left her in the open alleyway, completely unaware that her soul would choose to enter the broken security machine willingly out of a need for proximity. because her physical remains weren't forced into the tight channels of a stage endoskeleton. Her mind didn't experience the immediate degeneration that clouded her companions. She retained a significantly higher degree of cognitive clarity, human agency, and structural memory across the decades of her watch. She didn't forget her home or her real name, keeping her true identity intact from her first night. She understood exactly who she was, what happened to her outside the door, and the specific face of the man who drove the purple car. This clarity allowed her to act as a calculated strategist within the facility, rather than a mindless beast driven by animalistic survival loops. She could see the long scope of the history, preparing an organized resistance before the first missing children incident began. Her willingness to enter the metal turned her into a unique force in the timeline, a child who accepted the mask to serve as an advocate for future casualties. She didn't suffer from the sensory confusion that made the others attack any adult in a uniform, focusing her entire presence on her killer. Her clarity was her greatest asset, allowing her to manage the spiritual energy of the building safely. This distinction matters because it explains why the puppet behaves with a deliberate purpose that the classic band can't match during the night hours. She isn't a glitched asset running on an aggressive loop of panic. She's a daughter who stays close to her father's work to fix what the adults abandoned. Charlotte's death was a unique crime, creating the first true guardian of the haunted venue. Part 11. The puppet's original purpose, the inherent tragedy of her possession, lies in how her supernatural state twists the marionette's default programming loops. Henry originally coded the security device with a strict directive: ensure the safety of the young guests within the facility boundaries at all costs. When Charlotte's consciousness takes control, this rigid digital logic merges with her own human empathy, turning a corporate safety subroutine into an eternal crusade. She's no longer just scanning plastic wristbands near the exit points, patrolling the dark corridors after hours to monitor the safety of the rooms. The factory code is completely overwritten by her protective drive, turning the long limbs into a functional vehicle for her spiritual mission. She accepts the burden of the programming, using the machine's parameters to shield the innocent from her father's partner. This fusion means she can't leave the restaurant network files even when the building closes its doors for good. Her spirit is bound by a contract that links her fate to the future of the brand, forcing her to follow the inventory across multiple locations. The safety protocols she runs aren't legal scripts designed by a corporate lawyer, but a real spiritual obligation that ignores the passage of time. Imagine a little girl whose mind is permanently frozen in a loop of protective responsibility because her father trusted a computer to watch the door. She doesn't seek a personal reward or an escape from the metal cage, treating her watch as a necessary duty to manage the catastrophe. The puppet's original purpose becomes a cosmic curse that keeps her awake in the dark for a generation. She uses the machine's advanced sensors to track the presence of malice within the hallways, her eyes flashing with a silver light whenever danger approaches the stage. She turned a simple prize corner asset into a formidable judge, proving that her father's code could be weaponized to defend the community. Her crusade began in the diner, a silent watchman who refused to let another child stand alone. Part 12. Give gifts. Give life. This corrupted protective drive manifested completely during the death minigames that documented the immediate aftermath of the missing children incident. Charlotte, operating through the slender frame of the marionette, entered the dark parts and service room where the loose souls of Afton's 5 new victims were lingering. She found them floating in a state of intense, agonizing confusion after their sudden deaths. Realizing that their consciousnesses were fading into the void without an anchor, she stepped in to provide a physical conductor for their energy. She reached into the components bins, lifting the heavy plastic masks of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy to carry them toward the crying ghosts. This act wasn't a symbolic gesture of comfort, but a technical intervention that forced their spirits to merge with the hardware. By physically pressing the mascot masks onto their spiritual forms, she bound their consciousnesses to the silver endoskeletons securely. She gifted them a physical body through which they could interact with the real world, saving their identities from disappearing into the dark architecture. Her gift of life was a binding choice that locked the children into the operating code of the machines. The terrible irony of her action was that she saved them from the void by trapping them inside permanent prisons made of steel and fabric. She gave them the strength to push back against their killer, but she also locked them into a perpetual nightmare where they couldn't turn off their motors. The characters that were manufactured to bring joy turned into walking coffins, managed by her maternal altruism. When the final mask was locked into place, the eyes of the classic lineup twitched into motion, their lenses flashing with her silver light. She stood back from the maintenance tables, watching her new army adapt to the physical restrictions of their heavy bodies. She gave them a weapon, but she also gave them a curse that would take decades to burn away in the furnace of the final trap. Part 13. The missing children and the puppet's role Charlotte doesn't act as a detached ruler over the possessed characters. She functions as their spiritual mother and operational guide inside the facility. Because Gabriel, Fritz, Susie, and Jeremy died in a state of sheer panic inside the hidden safe room, their spirits are highly unstable. They operate on raw sensory inputs and blind rage, their memories clouded by the sudden violence of their final hour. Her presence acts as a stabilizing force within the building layout, channeling their chaotic confusion into an organized resistance against the staff. She helps them bypass their programming locks, allowing their heavy limbs to step off the stage coordinates after the main lights click off at midnight. She turns their individual pain into a collective force that hunts down the uniform. She guides their path through the narrow corridors, using her advanced awareness to coordinate their movements against the security office. The children look to the slender puppet for direction, because she's the only entity who displays an absolute certainty in the dark. She teaches them to analyze the camera monitor feed, selecting the blind spots perfectly to catch the watchman off guard. Without her constant management, the classic band would remain trapped in a loop of non-specific aggression, hitting solid barriers without a strategy. She gives their anger a target, ensuring that every adult who wears the silver badge faces a real consequence for the brand's history. She turns a group of weeping ghosts into heavy giants that possess the strength to crush a human skull. She watches over them during the day shifts too, hiding inside her box while they perform their festive routines for the local families. She listens to their digital vocal tracks play through the speakers, a forced performance that turns her internal grief into a focused baseline of determination. She stays in the trenches of the nightmare, a child who accepted the burden of leadership to protect her family. Part 14. Charlotte as the one who remembers, as William Afton later observed in his private logbooks. The vast majority of the possessed animatronics exist in a state of severe cognitive degeneration. The missing children operate like wild animals over the years, their human memories deleted by the invasive code of the company software. They can't remember their homes or their parents' faces, reacting only to the immediate presence of the uniform. Charlotte stands as the grand exception to this rule of mental decay. her mind remaining entirely self-aware across her long stay inside the machine. She possesses a clear, undisturbed memory of her past life, her father's workshop, and the specific identity of her murderer. This heightened consciousness allows her to act with deliberate calculation, avoiding the frantic panic that ruins her companion's choices. She doesn't wander the hallways aimlessly out of simple anger, carefully biding her time behind the prize counter to wait for a strategic opening. She understands the layout of the business empire perfectly, tracking the corporate restructuring plans that Afton drafts to expand the brand name. Her intelligence stays sharp, turning her initial trauma into a baseline of controlled behavior that dominates the night hours. This mental clarity allows her to manipulate the digital systems of the building, jamming the door buttons to ensure her targets can't escape her approach. She looks through the black eye sockets with a human focus that terrifies the guards, her presence bringing a cold atmosphere into the room. She isn't a machine running on a corrupted facial recognition database. She's a daughter who remembers the truth. She keeps the history of the crime alive within her circuits, refusing to let the corporate network wash away the blood with a cheap marketing campaign. While the other children get lost in the festive loops of the stage shows, Charlotte uses her isolation to plan a final resolution for the group. She remains the true mind of the resistance, a keeper who stays awake while the world moves past her box. Part 15. Protection turned into haunting despite her noble intentions at the parts tables. Charlotte's eternal protective mission quickly morphs into a horrific cosmic curse for the group. By giving the dead children life inside the mascot suits, she has inadvertently trapped them inside agonizing rusted metal tombs for decades. She didn't save their lives, she anchored their pain to the iron skeletons, preventing them from finding a natural rest outside. She can't truly heal their broken souls or return them to their worried families. Forced to watch them perform on stage during the day shifts for profit. Her protective instinct becomes a perpetual cycle of mechanical haunting, weaponizing their lingering spirits to fight a war that lacks an immediate exit route. She turns a cluster of innocent guests into a broken family of monsters that can't leave the grid. The classic band is forced to endure the physical decay of their vessels, their fabric coverings rotting over the years while the company alters the design. They stay awake through every technical adjustment, their consciousnesses fused to the internal components by her initial intervention. Her maternal altruism built a fortress for the victims, but the fortress turned into a permanent prison that ignores their tears. Imagine looking at your friends every night and realizing that your own gift is the reason why they're still trapped behind a plastic mask. Charlotte carries this psychological burden in silence, her long watch turning into a source of continuous distress as the decades advance across the timeline. She didn't want to create monsters, but she needed an army to stop the predator who left her in the rain. Her crusade remains active through multiple closures and grand ray openings, forcing her to supervise a hunt that reenacts the past crimes every single week. The children's anger continues to boil against the concrete walls, their entities passengers to a momentum that she initiated in the parts room. Her gift of life was a binding choice that linked their collective fate to the survival of the brand. Section 3. Charlotte across the early games, Part 16. Why the puppet is not evil. The visual presentation of the marionette during the night shift remains one of the most terrifying elements for any guard sitting behind the desk. The pale white face, magenta tear marks, and empty eye sockets create an unnatural silhouette that looks completely monstrous in the dim corridor light. Her erratic lunge and elongated body suggest a presence born from pure bloodlust, designed to inflict suffering upon the living. This frightening appearance doesn't reveal an evil nature, as the puppet stands as one of the few purely moral forces within the entire franchise history. She never attacks out of a desire for cruelty or a mindless impulse to cause destruction, her violence remaining entirely defensive and reactionary. When she targets an adult watchman, her actions represent a tragic misinterpretation of her foundational protective programming loops. Her internal logic perceives any adult authority figure within the facility as a direct threat to the safety of the children on the floor. She confuses the silver badge and the uniform with the predator who ruined her life outside the diner in 1983, reacting to the institutional markers of the brand with a raw aggression. She strikes to shield the other souls from another collection routine. She doesn't participate in the chaotic, blind assaults of the classic band, moving through the building only when her comfort mechanism runs dry. Her focus stays fixed on the defense of the rooms, turning her mechanical strength into a weapon that protects the remaining guests from an insider's malice. She carries a human heart behind the ceramic mask, her choices driven by a deep empathy for the weak. Understanding this behavior reveals that the puppet functions as a tragic hero who is forced to operate within the limits of a scary design. She accepts the frightening image to ensure that her presence can control the floor tiles after midnight arrives. Her violence is a distorted expression of a daughter's loyalty, a commitment to fix the safety failures of the business before another child is hurt behind the stage. Part 17. The Puppet in Five Nights at Freddy's 2: The New Location, opened in 1987, introduces a unique mechanical tension through the presence of the prize corner music box. From a technical standpoint, the player must continuously wind the device via the security monitor to keep the puppet pacified during the long hours of the shift. This repetitive activity dominates the defense routine, forcing the guard to prioritize the chimes above all other tasks. Within the lore, this gentle melody serves as the only thing that calms Charlotte's hyper-aware spirit, lulling her consciousness into a temporary state of quiet rest. The soft notes mimic the safety of her original childhood, grounding her volatile energy before her anger can override the facility's advanced facial recognition systems. The music box is a digital safety net that keeps the Guardian sleeping in her container. The moment the music box runs out, her consciousness wakes up completely. Releasing her limbs from the stage coordinates automatically. She navigates the bright hallways completely invisible to the building's digital sensors, her movements ignoring the criminal database firewalls that control the plastic toy models. She glides toward the office desk with a smooth cadence that the hardware cannot track or slow down. She ignores the flashing beam of the guard's flashlight, advancing through the central corridor with an absolute certainty that reveals her identity. The mascot mask doesn't trick her vision, and she looks through the plastic disguise to see the adult uniform sitting behind the console. The office offers no defensive doors against her approach, leaving the watchman without a shield once the chimes fall silent. This mechanic hides an important lore reality in plain sight, while the company markets the venue as a paradise of absolute safety. The executives treat her as a minor prop in the prize room inventory. Completely blind to the ghost that is monitoring their new infrastructure from the box, Charlotte bides her time in the shadows, her presence turning the commercial launch into a dangerous arena where the past is awake. Part 18. Save Them, and the second layer of death-to-death minigame known as Save Them exposes Charlotte's absolute desperation during a secondary mass murder event at the 1987 pizzeria. Controlling the classic Freddy Fazbear animatronic, The player follows the puppet through the blood-spattered hallways after hours. They move past fresh, unstuffed child corpses that are scattered across the party rooms, a confirmation that Afton has returned to the facility. Charlotte frantically signals for the heavy bear to follow her through the layout, her movements revealing a panic that breaks her usual calculating demeanor. She wants to save the new victims from fading into the void, trying to execute her gift of life routine before the cleanup crew arrives to conceal the evidence. The environment is a scene of total spiritual failure, with the blood staining the tile floors. Her efforts are completely neutralized when the purple sprite suddenly appears on the screen to intercept the machine's path. Afton doesn't use a golden suit disguise this time, actively tampering with the animatronic's internal programming to shut them down with a remote tool. The words "you can't" flash across the monitor, highlighting the tragic reality that Charlotte cannot out-engineer the creator of the business. This sequence confirms that her spiritual power remains limited by the physical parameters of the hardware she inhabits. She can't protect the new children when the killer uses his executive keys to rewrite the system loops from the command console. The modern replacements are left to rot in the central rooms, their entities caught in a second layer of death that she can't remedy with masks. The failure inside the 1987 location deepens the tragedy of her long watch, proving that her protective crusade is a continuous struggle against an insider's knowledge. She is forced to watch the brand expand its body count, her presence unable to stop the human malice that controls the corporate paperwork. The puppet retreats back to her prize box, her army defeated by a simple shutdown command. Part 19. Take Cake to the Children, the fundamental backstory of her murder, is explicitly delivered through the simplistic retro graphics of the Take Cake to the Children minigame. The layout strips away all corporate grandeur, showing a tiny room where a single Freddy sprite moves back and forth to feed a small group of guests. Charlotte stands completely isolated outside the building's boundary line, her figure shaking under the falling rain. The arrival of the purple car and the sudden rhythmic flashing of her sprite as Afton murders her establishes the franchise's earliest narrative foundation. The sequence conveys a raw sense of inescapable tragedy entirely through its primitive layout, showing a crime that occurred before the pizzerias grew into a chain. It tells the listener exactly where the curse was born, free of commercial illusions. Imagine being the parent who found that water-stained toy resting over a cold body near the local garbage bins the next morning. The simple gameplay loop delivers a heavy emotional weight, proving that the entire multi-game nightmare began because an adult chose to hurt a child outside a door. The pixelated tears on her face match the tracks that would eventually define the marionette's ceramic mask. This minigame functions as a historical record within the timeline, exposing the real history that the corporate executives tried to delete from their servers. It recontextualizes the festive music of the restaurants, showing that the global brand was built on top of an unmarked grave in an alleyway. Charlotte's initial suffering is the engine that drives the timeline, a memory that refuses to clear its files. The simplicity of the presentation makes the tragedy land harder, stripping the horror down to its human core before the advanced robotics entered the workshop. It's the point of origin for the spiritual resistance, a quiet execution in the mud of 1983 that turned a safety machine into a permanent judge. The small girl left her name in the rain, her pain locking into the iron components. Part 20. The puppet and the toy animatronics, the operational chaos of the 1987 location, leaves room for a major structural debate among those who map the timeline. While the toy models are equipped with state-of-the-art criminal databases and facial recognition software, their aggressive behavior towards staff members implies something deeper in a code glitch. They don't follow their factory scripts, tracking the guards with a hostile focus after midnight. Law indicators suggest that Charlotte's proximity within the building's confined prize corner acts as a metaphysical contaminant on the local network. Her immense spiritual energy bleeds into the operating loops of the venue, supercharging the broken programming of the toys with a defensive consciousness. The plastic models absorb her protective drive, turning their criminal scanners into weapons against the uniform. They stare at adults with an unblinking gaze during the afternoon shows, their software loops corrupted by the negative energy that saturates the dining hall. This continuous pollution leads directly to the catastrophic system failure known as the Bite of 87, where a performer lunged from the stage to strike a guest. The children's anger couldn't be contained by a simple corporate safety protocol. The toys become extension vessels for her resistance, their plastic jaws moving to the frequency of her old grudge against the brand. She doesn't need to physically stuff their frames to spread the infection. Her presence in the building enough to warp the behavior of the new infrastructure. She turns a clean corporate launch into a haunted arena, where the modern characters mimic her classic band. This interconnected chaos proves that her spiritual influence can alter an entire facility without her touching a wire. She overrides the expensive upgrades that the executives manufactured to wash away the memory of the diner, turning their new shields into targets for the ghosts. The puppet controls the atmosphere of the venue, ensuring that the past remains active under the neon signs. The closure of the secondary restaurant leaves the toy models slated for immediate demolition, but the rot inside the brand's network files stays active. Charlotte returns to the storage boxes alongside the withered originals, her long watch continuing through the decades of corporate liquidation. She refused to let the modern company escape the weight of the initial crime, her energy locking the doors on their expansion. Part 21. The Puppet in Five Nights at Freddy's 3. 30 years after the closure of the secondary pizzeria, the remaining assets of the brand end up inside a horror attraction called Fazbear's Fright. The builders scavenge the ruined buildings to find authentic props, treating the original marionette as a simple decorative doll to hang on the wall. They don't realize that the white mask carries a living presence, placing the shell in the corridor as an atmospheric detail for the guests. Charlotte stays quiet within the wooden frame, her spirit surviving the passage of decades without losing her cognitive focus. She watches the modern hallways, her presence introducing a hidden tension that the staff can't perceive from their desk. The player experiences a unique split in the attraction's environment, tracking two distinct versions of the character across the night shifts. A phantom illusion regularly materializes inside the office, blocking the watchman's vision with an erratic stance that triggers a sudden ventilation outage. This phantom version isn't a physical threat, operating as a mental hallucination caused by the toxic gas lines in the walls. The real marionette moves through the corridors without those digital distortions, her smooth shell remaining free of broken plates. She navigates the rooms with a steady cadence, her figure appearing on the monitors as a solid shape that defies the rules of the camera system. Charlotte utilizes her physical form to track the movements of the rabbit costume that the staff recovered from the sealed safe room. She recognizes the golden frame moving through the pipes, its mummified occupant driven by the same hostility that defined the crime in 1983. She doesn't run away from his presence, using her advanced awareness to monitor his path through the facility. Her stay inside the attraction is a calculated watch, ensuring that her killer doesn't escape the building when the owner launches the show. She manipulates the old control panels in the background, using her energy to keep the system active while the equipment fails. She stays close to the ventilation valves, tracking the mechanical adjustments that the guard executes to keep the air flowing through the office. She doesn't let the corporate marketing dilute her focus, treating the commercial displays as a simple stage where the final accounting can occur. Her white face stays fixed in the dark, a silent guardian who marks the distance between the predator and his victims. The physical marionette doesn't trigger the audio alarms when she shifts between the rooms, her movements silent as she studies the rubble. She bypasses the digital firewalls that the managers install to run the displays, her spirit operating on a frequency that ignores the modern code. She uses her corner memories to stabilize her energy, keeping her mind sharp while the environment breaks down around her platform. She views the wood panels as temporary insulation, a structural shell that will soon play a role in her father's purging plan. Charlotte spends her shifts opening secret pathways within the software of the arcade cabinets, preparing a rescue operation for the other spirits. She understands that the missing children are still dreaming inside the old components, their minds trapped in a loop of their final moments on June 26. She uses her technical access to embed restorative code lines into the games, creating a hidden exit that the cleanup crew can't delete with a system reset. Her work is a silent intervention that runs beneath the operational layers of the venue. When the attraction catches fire at the end of the week, Charlotte remains inside the burning corridors to supervise the destruction of the inventory. She doesn't flee from the thermal surge, watching the flames consume the festive props and the old posters that line the halls. She knows that the fire isn't Triumph's tool that can weaken the bonds of the remnant inside the rabbit suit. Her mask reflects the glow of the furnace, a quiet witness to the killer's pain as the beams collapse into the dirt. Part 22. Happiest Day. The true resolution of the early timeline occurs within a hidden dreamscape that Charlotte constructs beneath the computing code of the attraction. She bypasses the physical ruins of the fire to establish a quiet party room, a sanctuary where the rules of the business don't apply anymore. The room features a grey layout that lacks the commercial paint of the pizzerias, creating a safe harbour for the spirits who suffered inside the venues. Charlotte walks through this digital space with a deliberate purpose, carrying a birthday cake toward a long table where the ghosts are waiting. Grey children stand motionless along the perimeter of the room, their figures stripped of the frantic rage that defined their nightly hunts. They wear the masks of the classic characters, but these items aren't corporate props in the dreamscape, serving as the remaining links to their human identity. They don't perform or follow an automated routine, their spirits silent as they wait for the coordinator to finish the setup. Charlotte moves past them without a sound, her ceramic faceplate displaying the purple tear marks that connect her to their shared suffering. She navigates past the intermediate spirits who represent the newer casualties of the brand, her focus fixed on the deepest wound in the history of the diner. She reaches the crying soul of the final child, a spirit whose mind is frozen in the moment of his initial trauma behind the stage. He sits alone at the end of the table, his tears falling onto the floor tiles because he never received a real celebration from his family. Charlotte steps into his view, offering the frosted cake as a direct antidote to his agony. By presenting him with the bear mask, she heals the foundational grief that kept his energy anchored to the iron components of the facility. This gesture isn't an automated script, but a deep act of human empathy that corrects the betrayal he experienced during the bite of 1983. The child stops weeping as the mask touches his spirit, his mind releasing the panic that corrupted his vision for a generation. The token of comfort neutralizes the old pain, turning a haunted memory into a peaceful release. The moment the cake rests on the table, the grey landscape changes, and the children place their masks on their faces for the last time. They don't wear them as metal prisons anymore, using the characters to celebrate a birthday that was stolen from them by an adult's choices. The environment lightens as the shared trauma dissolves into the background, breaking the loops of hostility that kept their motors forward. The children stand together as a real family, free of the brand's registry. The classic masks fall to the floorboards simultaneously, empty of the spiritual energy that drove the heavy limbs through the western corridor for decades. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy become useless pieces of fabric and plastic, their connection to the children's life force broken by the host's intervention. The spirits leave their vessels behind in the dust, their entities expanding into a clean state that allows them to escape the boundaries of the facility name. They are no longer items on a stage. 5 colorful balloons float upward off the top of the monitor screen, a visual confirmation that the missing children found their way to the afterlife. The ascent shows that their energy is no longer conductible by the silver gears or the copper wiring, moving into a quiet void where the corporation can't exploit their pain. They leave the timeline together, finding a rest that took 30 years to engineer. Charlotte watches them go from the edge of the room, her work for the group finalized at the table. Charlotte doesn't join the ascent, her own balloon remaining out of the flight while the screen fades into black tiles. She makes a cold choice to stay behind inside the system loops, knowing that her predator's spirit is still active within the mummified remains of the rabbit costume. She refuses to accept her own release, while William Afton preserves his identity in the rubble, turning her back on the exit door to continue her watch. Her mask stays in the dark, a lonely protector who handles the final pieces of the wall. Section 4. Henry's Guilt A.N. Charlotte's Legacy Part 23. Henry Emily's Failure. Following the murder of his daughter outside the diner, Henry Emily descends into a state of total psychological ruin. The grief shatters his sanity, turning his days into a silent cycle of self-punishment inside an empty house. He can't look at his tools without feeling a crushing sense of intellectual irony that breaks his capacity for normal comfort. He's the premier engineering mastermind of his generation, a man who built an entire empire of autonomous machines, yet his talent failed when his family needed protection. The tracking program he compiled for the security doll was flawless on paper, designed to secure the perimeter without human error. He put his total trust in the digital code, believing that a machine could watch over Charlotte while he worked on mechanical repairs backstage. This reliance on an automated watchman became his undoing, a shortcut that left his child without a guard when a group of bullies blocked the box lid. His highest tier safety asset was thoroughly neutralized by a pile of cardboard packages. This failure drives him into a deep isolation that lasts for decades, cutting his tethers to the local business community completely. He walks away from the design tables, unable to face the reality that his creative gifts directly assisted the Predator's operations. He realizes that by engineering the durable frames and smooth joints for the classic band, He provided William Afton with the industrial tools needed to execute his atrocities. His workshop was a factory for walking coffins. The knowledge that his craftsmanship made the missing children cover-up possible is a heavy burden that he carries in silence. He understands that the hollow spaces inside the torsos were perfectly sized to conceal a child's body, a technical layout that his partner exploited on June 26. The solid plates and thick fabric insulated the remains, keeping the crime scene hidden from the police walkthroughs during the afternoon rush. Henry's art became a shield for a serial killer, a thought that ruins his sleep. He spends his absent decades re-examining his schematics in the dark, his mind trapped in a loop of permanent regret. He can't forgive himself for leaving the hidden safe room off the official blueprints, a structural concession that created a blind spot out in the open. That unmapped corner allowed Afton to don the yellow rabbit suit without triggering the camera sensors, providing a fortress where human evil could function unchecked. Henry's pen drew the coordinates of the graveyard. His long silence during the subsequent investigations deepens his personal complicity, turning the inventor into a silent partner to the malice. He knew Afton's character carried a dark center, but he chose to look away from the warning signs to preserve the corporate pipeline. By protecting the public image of the brand name after Charlotte died, he left the door open for a larger disaster that claimed 5 more innocent guests. The guilt turns his talent into a curse that he can't wash away with tears. He lives as a reclusive ghost while the corporation replicates his patents to expand its global body count across the country. He watches the new venues open under neon signs, recognizing his old spring-lock mechanisms inside the modern architecture of the toys. He understands that his legacy is a self-sustaining nightmare that continues to feed on the community, a machine that runs on an algorithm of pure suffering. He knows he can't run away anymore, his focus turning toward a final destruction. Part 24. The wound between Henry and William, the murder of Charlotte, transforms the business alliance between the two founders into a generational tragedy of true betrayal. Afton didn't just steal corporate assets or sabotage financial spreadsheets to claim control over the brand name. He tore out the emotional core of his partner's life out of sheer ego. This violent act creates a massive, decades-long Cold War between the two men that runs beneath the surface floor of the company. They stay linked by a bloodline of crimes that alters the timeline forever. While Afton spends his life running illegal laboratories beneath his private residence to harvest soul remnants, Henry lives as a reclusive ghost in a distant town. The old builder doesn't track the profit margins anymore, focusing his remaining intelligence on the physical laws that control how a soul enters a suit. He watches his old friend replicate his blueprints to achieve an empty promise of immortality, studying the creativity of his malice from afar. The partnership becomes a battle of engineering skills. Henry realizes that William's professional jealousy was the real engine behind the initial killings at the diner. Afton lacked the innate talent to build sentient machinery. Watching Henry balance the gears with a resentment that slowly mutated into a psychotic urge to destroy his family. The yellow rabbit costume wasn't just a festive entertainer. It was a mobile disguise that William wore to override the natural caution of his partner's daughter. The machine was a tool of spite. This deep wound can't be healed by a corporate settlement or a legal intervention, requiring an industrial solution that can purge the system completely. Henry spends his quiet hours drawing layout plans for a final instrument of mutually assured destruction, turning his guilt into a calculated strategy of resistance. He knows that his partner treats human agony like a scientific variable, and he designs a trap that will use those same parameters to corner him. The silent conflict spans across multiple generations of pizzerias, outlasting the original structures and the health department inspections. While William uses the company name to secure new victims, Henry is building a ledger that tracks every mechanical asset in the inventory. He maps out the coordinates of the old safe rooms, tracking how the spiritual residue remains active inside the iron components long after the buildings are abandoned. He becomes a hunter who works in the dark code. He understands that his old friend's reliance on the spring-lock frame is his primary vulnerability, a technical choice that can be used to lock his cage. Henry knows the exact tension of those volatile steel clips, having built the systems that crushed William's flesh during the rainstorm inside the condemned venue. He doesn't look for a verbal apology, preparing a sentence that will match the scale of the Predator's crimes across eternity. The two masters are locked in a final calculation. The relationship that founded the first roadside diner finishes as a cold equation where only one engineer can control the exit keys. Henry accepts the necessity of his own destruction, knowing that he must step into the furnace alongside his partner to ensure the blueprints are completely erased from the world. He polishes his final schematics with a calm detachment, ready to turn their corporate history into a heap of liquid metal. The alliance concludes in the ashes of a fake restaurant. Part 25. The puppet as Henry's living grief for over 30 years. The ongoing existence of the marionette operates as a physical manifestation of Henry's permanent failure. Every time a new franchise location opens its doors and prints promotional art featuring the character, the inventor is forced to look at a corporate caricature of his shame. The doll that carried his daughter's dead body through the mud is turned into a festive toy for a new generation of customers, a reality that breaks his heart. The puppet's survival through multiple fires, corporate liquidations, and grand reopenings serves as a constant supernatural reminder that Charlotte's soul is still actively suffering. She didn't fade into the void after the initial crime concluded, her spirit trapped inside a thin chassis of plastic and synthetic fiber because her father couldn't protect her. Henry has to monitor her tracking frequency from his quiet room, knowing his daughter is living as a ghost watchman. He watches her glide through the blood-spattered hallways of the 1987 location on his security monitors, her movements guided by a maternal altruism that he failed to display. While he hid from his guilt in a distant city, his child was standing in the front lines of the nightmare, giving gifts and giving life to the new victims. She handled the consequences of his engineering failures. Her ceramic faced a silent reproach to his retirement. Every appearance of the marionette within the historic files confirms that her protective drive has turned into a perpetual cycle of mechanical haunting. She can't save the children or return them to their parents, weaponizing their lingering spirits to attack any adult who wears the silver badge. Henry looks at his greatest invention and sees an agonizing cage that prevents his family from resting, a physical monument to the night he left the door locked. The corporation utilizes her image to sell prizes and distribute tickets, thoroughly blind to the ghost that operates behind the striped fabric of the limbs. Henry has to watch his partner's business model thrive on top of his daughter's grave, her suffering converted into a commercial asset for a negligent executive team. This commercial exploitation turns his grief into a sharp baseline of determination, forcing his return to the workshop table. He realizes that the water-stained doll can't leave the restaurant network loops, while William Afton's energy remains active inside the safe room. Her loyalty is a permanent chain that keeps her tethers locked to the brand, forcing her to patrol the dark corridors until the timeline ends. Henry understands that to save his daughter, he must construct a physical container that can capture her frame without damaging her spirit. The presence of the puppet across 3 decades of horror is the ultimate proof that technology can't cleanly manage a spiritual catastrophe. Henry's tools created the vessel, but his daughter's pain provided the power source that keeps the motors turning without a battery. He closes his design journals, his mind fully focused on an industrial solution that will gather his family into a final room where the smoke can wash away the stains. Part 26. Lefty, the trap built for the puppet in 2023. Henry Emily finally emerges from his long exile to execute his master plan, designing a highly specialized capture vessel known as Lefty. The acronym outlines a precise technical loop: lure, encapsulate, fuse, transport, and extract. Outwardly styled as a sleek black variation of the classic Freddy Fazbear model, the machine's internal architecture is a terrifyingly precise trap engineered specifically to counteract his daughter's unique supernatural biology. The internal mechanisms include a specialized dream state audio emitter that continuously broadcasts the soothing frequencies of the old music box. Henry installed this transmitter inside the chest cavity to pacify Charlotte's spirit upon contact, lulling her advanced awareness into a temporary state of quiet rest. This audio track prevents her spiritual energy from shorting out the electronic processors inside the skull, neutralizing her defenses before she can execute an escape protocol. The physical layout of the torso features a unique interior cavity lined with a soft, shock-absorbing material to prevent structural damage to her slender frame during the capture sequence. When the black bear approaches her position in the dark alleyway, the shell triggers an automated hatch that swallows her figure without a sound. The outer plates clamp shut instantly, locking her thin limbs within a localized behavioral electromagnetic grid that thoroughly paralyzes her movement. What it means for a grieving father to design an automated cage for his own child is a source of deep sorrow that dominates his late hours. Henry has to act as a cold technician, configuring parameters to trap his daughter to ensure she reaches the final restaurant furnace safely. He can't offer her a gentle rescue or a human embrace, using a mechanical monster to force her compliance with his purging plan. The creation of Lefty is his most heartbreaking compromise. He decides containment is the only practical way to give her peace, because her protective nature would always prevent her from leaving the timeline voluntarily. Left to her own devices, her spirit would continue to wander the dark corridors of the city, defending new victims from a virus she can't delete with her own power. By trapping her inside the black bear, he secures her presence within the collection grid, ensuring she'll be in the room when the final matches are struck. The assembly project costs him his remaining pride as an engineer, forcing him to copy the exact stuffing methods his old partner used to hide the bodies decades ago. He builds a walking coffin for his family, coating the exterior in a safe matte finish to ensure the manager can place it on the stage without raising suspicions from the customers. Lefty sits near the front tables, a silent performer holding a captive soul that waits for the temperature to rise. The machine runs on a rigid algorithm that forces it to behave as a standard animatronic asset during the day shifts, automated to perform for the happy families. Michael salvages the unit from the back alley, placing it behind the management desk to run the diagnostic checks, without realizing his sister's old protector is locked inside the iron ribs. Henry tracks the proximity indicators from his control booth. knowing the first piece of his trap is locked into the grid. Part 27. Charlotte inside Lefty, the tragic reality of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, is visually confirmed during rare screen prompts that reveal the physical anatomy of the trap. When the power lines fail in the office, the monitor illumination catches the silhouette of the black bear resting against the wallboards. The puppet's thin, striped arms and white and black torso can be seen wedged tightly inside the claustrophobic mechanical joints of Lefty's interior chassis. Her ceramic faceplate stays hidden behind the plastic jaw, a prisoner inside a machine. Charlotte stays silent within the dark cavity, her spirit sedated by the constant music box tune that plays through the internal audio modules. She doesn't fight the iron rods that press against her ribs, her consciousness floating in a state of artificial sleep that prevents her from shorting out the wiring. The old engineer designed the insulation to survive her immense spiritual energy, turning his daughter's haunted protector into a passive asset for his final week of business. To complete his final purge, Henry was forced to commit a horrific paternal paradox that shatters his moral pride as a creator. He had to build a monster to hunt down his own child, trapping her inside a heavy corporate suit to force her compliance with the layout coordinates. He treats his daughter like a dangerous material that must be secured within the collection grid, using his technical skills to deny her freedom until the boilers reach their limit. Imagine being the manager who has to run the daily maintenance scans while that black bear sits inches from your console desk. Michael tracks the audio distractions through the ventilation maze, thoroughly blind to the fact that his father's first victim is locked inside the machine on the stage. The doll that gave life to his childhood companions is now a silent passenger in a fake restaurant, her long watch controlled by a father's script. The placement of Lefty on the showroom floor is a calculated exercise in corporate misdirection that keeps the local inspectors from looking too closely at the vents. The customers watch the black bear move its hands on the platform, thoroughly blind to the ghost that lives behind the safe matte finish of the chest plates. Henry uses his daughter's presence to stabilize the atmosphere of the dining hall, using his engineering masterpiece to mask the preparation of the furnace. He looks at her signal from his hidden control room, his mind carrying a heavy sorrow as he watches the temperature gauges begin to climb in the lower crawl spaces. He knows that to save her soul from the eternal crusade, he must let the flames consume the very machinery he built to hold her face. The development parameters stay secondary to his role as a judge, his hands preparing the ignition sequences that will turn their shared workshop into a tomb. Charlotte remains inside the black chassis for 6 long nights, her presence a silent witness to the final gathering of her family's enemies. She listens to her killer's raspy breathing through the ventilation pipes, her protective programming loop sedated, but her memory sharp behind the plastic lenses. She bides her time in the dark joints, a captive guardian who waits for the automatic locks to drop the iron shutters across the exits. Part 28. Henry's final speech. During the chaotic climax of the salvage narrative, Henry Emily activates the facility's master override from his remote console terminal. The action locks every fire door and ventilation shutter simultaneously, cutting off the audio loops to the public rooms to initialize the shutdown script. For the first time in the franchise's history, the old builder speaks directly to his daughter over the intercom speakers, his tone breaking with a father's quiet sorrow. He bypasses her corporate animatronic designations to use her real name, his words cutting through the low hum of the rising boilers beneath the floor tiles. He says he should have known she'd be content to disappear. Acknowledging her selfless nature that never sought a personal reward or a public certificate of safety. He speaks to her not as a ghost monster, but as the innocent child who walked through his workshop doors in 1983. His monologue validates her entire decades-long character arc, framing her protective crusade as the true moral core of the haunted timeline. He apologizes for the rainy night outside the diner, the day she was shut out and left to die beside the garbage containers while no one was there to lift her up. He notes how she spent her afterlife lifting others into her arms, serving as a spiritual mother to the missing children. The speech strips away the commercial illusions of Fazbear Entertainment, delivering a raw final accounting that honors the human cost of the tragedy. Henry speaks with a calm weight that fills the small security office, his phrases free of trailer-style hype or dramatic padding. He gives his daughter his words as a final token of comfort, a reassuring signal that her long watch is finally over. The father has returned to take the burden off her back. Picture what it actually felt like for Michael to sit in that chair and hear his father's old partner read the final ledger over the speakers. The words break the loop of their daily performance, turning the fake pizzeria into a sacred courtroom where the master of the business faces his judgment. Henry doesn't look for an apology from William, focusing his remaining energy on guiding his daughter's soul toward the exit door. The intercom lines carry his trembling voice into the central hub where Lefty sits motionless under the red emergency lights. The chimes of the music box turn off automatically, releasing Charlotte's mind from the sedation matrix just as the room begins to fill with smoke. She looks through the black eye sockets, hearing her father's voice validate her suffering after 40 years of silence behind a plastic mask. The contract is finished. Henry finishes the monologue with a quiet promise of rest, his terminal locking the files to ensure that the secrets remain buried beneath the foundation forever. He gives up his role as a creator to stand as a parent, letting his own voice serve as the final conductor that guides her spirit away from the machinery. The speech closes the classic era, a father's apology that breaks the loops of negligence that built the graveyard. Part 29. The final fire as Henry's monologue concludes. The structural temperature of the fake pizzeria rises above sustainable levels, initiating a total thermal purge of the facility. The old engineer configures the central boilers to flood the ventilation maze with a severe heat wave, turning the party zones into a functional grid of incinerator cells. The fire is engineered with precise alchemical intent to target the structural bonds of the remnant within the silver endoskeletons. The extreme heat melts the plastic plates and copper wiring, permanently dissolving the spiritual links that bind the souls to the physical components. In this grand inferno, Charlotte burns alongside her killer, her father, Elizabeth Afton, and the molten remains of the original missing children victims. The flames rise through the drywall boundaries, breaking the layout of the business empire that caused decades of suffering across the community. It's a violent, cleansing end. The iron shutters drop into place with a loud clang, blocking every exit route from the building layout to ensure nothing escapes into the void. William Afton's mummified costume twitches violently as the fire takes hold of his green fabric, his bones spike useless against the solid iron doors. Henry watches the thermometer gauges climb from his control booth, his finger holding the trip switch down to guarantee the finality of the purge, sealing the perimeter thoroughly. The black bear chassis containing the puppet begins to soften under the pressure. The safe mat finished peeling away to expose the silver framework underneath. Charlotte doesn't strike the barriers or call out for assistance. her spirit accepting the thermal surge as the only practical exit from her permanent cage. The heat destroys the safety subroutines that controlled her choices, releasing her consciousness from the rigid logic of the tracking program. Imagine sitting in that office while the ceiling panels collapse into the pit, your terminal console melting into liquid slag on the floorboards. Michael stays in his chair, his dead tissue finally dissolving under the strain of the furnace as the flames close over his desk. He welcomes the destruction of his father's portfolio, choosing to join the old engineer in the rubble to ensure the family line is finished for good. The fire consumes 30 years of corporate denial, burning the old logbooks, the promotional art, and the unmapped blueprints that hidden the crimes. The corporation can't wash away the blood with a cheap marketing campaign this time. The entire history of Fazbear Entertainment reduced to a silent mound of ash. Henry stays at his workbench as his monitors fail, accepting the fire as the only logical conclusion for his career. The structural pillars groan and collapse inward, burying the remnants of the classic band beneath a thick layer of scorched bricks. The Inferno achieves its primary objective, breaking the conductors of the pain to release the spirits from their metal tombs. The room falls silent, the heat clearing the registry of every haunted asset to leave a clean slate for the city outside the brick boundaries. The classic era ends in smoke. Part 30. Charlotte's Rest. The conclusion of the fire is framed as a beautiful, long overdue release for Charlotte Emily after 40 years of constant spiritual warfare. Her soul is finally permitted to detach from the melting plastic of the marionette, her spirit expanding into a stable state that leaves the machinery behind. She drops the burden of managing the angry ghosts, her long watch over the missing children concluded at the center of the furnace. The small girl leaves her ceramic mask in the ashes, her consciousness transitioning into the quiet void where her father's spirit is waiting. She doesn't have to scan wristbands or wind the music box to find a temporary state of rest, her identity restored to its original human form before the storm outside the diner. The old wounds are healed by the fire, separating the daughter from the monster she inhabited. However, within the wider context of Five Nights at Freddy's modern era, her perfect peace is left with a haunting question mark that worries researchers. The emergence of the Mimic program, Glitch Trap, and the ongoing digital reconstruction of old Fazbear locations suggest that the corporate legacy continues to stain the earth. A single scanned motherboard could import the old data tracks back into the system loops, threatening a reactivation. If the metal retains the memory of her initial suffering, her energy might be dragged back into the grid by a new generation of developers. The brand doesn't die when the founders burn, using their old design patents to build the sprawling neon corridors of the mega pizzaplex. The Guardian might find her spirit locked in a fresh theater of operations where the old furnace offers no protection. The white mask sits silent and unblinking in the rubble, its black eye sockets empty of the silver light that defined her presence during the night shifts. The final sheets of the incident report leave her status suspended, a mystery that proves the difficulty of cleanly deleting a tragedy from the history of the town. Her sacrifice brought a temporary safety, but the foundation remains vulnerable to commercial exploitation. Picture the empty concrete seal over the pit and realizing that the code can still copy the patterns of her killer without his presence. The new characters move on paths that mimic the old hunts, their software infected by a virus that ignores the final accounting Henry executed in 2023. Charlotte's legacy remains a light that stays near the boundary, a ghost that can't rest while the rot is active. She spent her afterlife carrying the sins of adults on her back, and that deeply ingrained baseline of protection might keep her spirit near the earth. She wouldn't use the exit door if her predator maintained a presence in the code, choosing to watch the perimeter from the shadows of the new complex. Her rest is a fragile pause in a timeline that continues to dig up the graves for profit. Charlie Emily steps out of the quiet background of the games to become a living protagonist within the alternate continuity of the novel trilogy. Books like The Silver Eyes present her story through a fresh lens, giving her a human voice that changes how we experience the family history. She isn't a silent ghost hiding inside a prize container here, but a teenage girl who has to navigate the memories of her hometown. This shift allows the writer to explore her perspective closely, turning her into a real anchor for the mystery. She returns to Hurricane, Utah, years after her father's workshop went dark, looking for a way to process her childhood loss. The narrative operates under separate rules from the mainline entries, focusing on a group of friends who gather to honor a past tragedy. Charlie walks through the empty streets, her mind haunted by the silhouette of the old diner, where her early years concluded. She doesn't understand the secret parameters of her existence yet, feeling a strange distance that she can't explain with normal logic. The human story lets the reader feel the weight of her relationships as she uncovers the layout of the old business. She visits her father's house, a quiet building filled with unfinished machinery and dusty blueprints that reflect his mental breakdown. Charlie tracks the clues with a persistent determination, her thoughts moving past the corporate illusions to find the truth about the missing children. She doesn't navigate as a supernatural guide, experiencing the panic of a normal teenager who discovers a monster in the dark rooms. Her journey brings her into a direct confrontation with the threat of William Afton, who operates in the town under a false identity. The predator doesn't stay hidden behind a digital wall. His malice and immediate danger that forces her to defend her friends directly. Charlie has to rely on her own strength to survive his traps, her choices driving the plot forward with a rapid velocity. The books strip away the security office console, forcing the characters to fight the characters on the floor tiles. The writer uses her perspective to challenge the baseline assumptions about her family line, setting up a deeper mystery that unfolds across the chapters. She isn't just an observer of the brand's ruin. She's the central target of a plan that her father Passions initiated before his death. As she explores the tunnels beneath the town, her memories begin to fracture, revealing a strange variance that hints at a hidden origin. She carries a heavy sorrow that shapes her identity, turning her search into a deep existential struggle. The story inside the pages avoids the technical jargon of a software report, keeping the focus entirely on her emotional reality. Imagine being a teenager who discovers that your favorite childhood toys contain the tracking signals of a serial killer. Charlie doesn't have a security monitor to shield her optics, facing the plastic masks with a vulnerability that makes her survival uncertain. Her presence dominates the book trilogy, creating a parallel legacy that honors her name with a human face. Part 32, Henry's android daughter, the novel continuity, reveals an unsettling twist that changes our understanding of the tragedy in 1983. The young Charlotte Emily died outside the diner during the infancy of the business, her life ended by the spite of a family friend. Henry couldn't cope with the loss of his daughter, turning his workshop into a sanctuary of desperate creation. He didn't build a puppet to hold her spirit, choosing instead to channel his grief into a cybernetic project that defied the natural laws of mortality. He constructs 4 separate cybernetic bodies to represent his daughter at different stages of human growth, wanting to replicate the life that was stolen. He spends his nights refining the synthetic skin and the internal joints, his mind completely broken by the memory of the storm. The project becomes a hidden obsession that isolates him from the local community, his tools used to manufacture a copy of his child. He builds a toddler, a young girl, a teenager, and an adult frame to complete the cycle. The mechanism relies on a specialized tripod equipped with a camera that absorbs his tears during his daily breakdowns. This interaction injects a synthetic spark of life into the programming, turning his intense sorrow into a functional power source for the machine. He doesn't invite a ghost into the metal components, creating an artificial consciousness that runs on a loop of a parent's pain. The teenage version grows up with the name Charlie, completely blind to her mechanical interior. Her memory files are entirely compiled by her creator, who installs fake experiences to shield her from her true origin. She remembers a normal childhood in a quiet town, her mind holding records of school days and family dinners that never occurred in reality. This structural illusion keeps her functioning like a real person, masking the gears and wires that move her limbs. Charlie accepts her life without a single doubt, trusting the thoughts her father left in her processor. This artificial life stands as a physical monument to her father's inability to accept a grave behind the restaurant. Henry pours his own identity into the coding, creating a copy that possesses his creative talent but lacks a human soul. He watches the robot walk through the house, his guilt turned into a technological asset that allows him to pretend the crime never happened. The project dominates his workshop until he can't distinguish between his family and his schematics. He leaves the adult version unfinished when his sanity collapses entirely, creating a dangerous asset that stays hidden in a back room. Henry ends his life with a mechanical blade, leaving his artificial daughter to navigate a world that lacks a template for her design. The trilogy explores her existence with a steady focus, showing a protagonist who must discover that her humanity is a beautifully crafted lie. She carries his grief in her chest, a machine that wants to be a girl. Part 33. Novel Charlie vs. Game Charlotte, comparing these two versions, reveals a thematic contrast that highlights the depth of the franchise's mystery structure. The book trilogy shouldn't be forced into the same timeline as the games, operating on a separate set of rules that explore loss from a different angle. While both characters share the name of Henry's daughter, their internal realities are completely distinct. One daughter is a ghost who knows her identity, while the other is a machine that believes a lie. The game character is a self-aware spirit who takes control of the puppet on her first night inside the venue. She doesn't suffer from the mental decay that turns her companions into wild animals, keeping her human agency sharp across decades of watch. She remembers her father's workshop and the face of the man who left her in the rain, acting with a quiet focus. Game Charlotte is a maternal figure who coordinates the resistance from her prize box. The book version, conversely, is an artificial intelligence that lives behind a sophisticated human facade. She doesn't understand her own nature for most of her journey, her consciousness clouded by the fake memories her creator left in her circuits. She has to fight an internal battle against severe identity dysmorphia, her optics tracking a reflection that looks real but lacks a beating heart. She's a walking monument to a father's denial, trapped inside a code loop. The ghost inside the puppet uses her supernatural awakening to elevate others, giving gifts and giving life to the missing children. She doesn't hunt for her own satisfaction, her violence a reactionary misinterpretation of her protective safety loops. She accepts the ugly mask of the doll because it provides a body to punish the uniform. Her crusade defined by a selfless altruism that brings order to the rooms. She protects the innocent. The robot inside the books is entirely consumed by her own existential crisis as the layers of deception peel away from her skin. She doesn't have a soul to save. Her life force a synthetic frequency born from her parents' tears on a camera tripod. When she looks at the characters, she doesn't see companions in a war, but mirrors that expose her own mechanical interior. Her journey is a lonely search for a humanity she can't possess. This division shows that the writer used the two timelines to examine different responses to a serial killer's spite. The games focus on how a soul enters a suit after a crime occurs, keeping the focus on the spiritual residue left in the metal. The books turn the focus inward, exploring how far an engineer will go to rewrite a tragedy with tools. One girl stays in the pizzerias to shield the living, while the other walks through a human world trying to find a heart. Part 34. Elizabeth, Baby and the Twisted Novel ending the final book in the trilogy introduces a spectacular confrontation that brings the two founders' daughters into a dark room. The adult version of the robot line, which Henry abandoned before his suicide, becomes the central vessel for the final conflict. William Afton steals this advanced chassis from the empty workshop, modifying the plates to build a collection tool for his underground projects. He installs a hidden claw mechanism inside the torso. This modified shell becomes Circus Baby, a gleaming performer that executes its tracking subroutine on the killer's own daughter. The system captures Elizabeth Afton during a moment of parental neglect, trapping her within the iron ribs of the machine. Her soul enters the plastic frame, her consciousness merging with the software parameters until her human memories fade into a loop of corporate obedience. She becomes a tool for his portfolio. The narrative culminates inside the fourth closet, where Charlie faces off against this adult version of her own design line. The scene brings two separate manifestations of family tragedy together, both fighting for the right to occupy the same mechanical frame. One is a simulated daughter running on a parent's grief, while the other is a corrupted spirit driven by a desperate need for a father's approval. The room feels cold. Elizabeth uses the clown disguise to mock her rival, her voice carrying a weighted tone that reflects her internal corruption. She wants to eliminate the copy to prove that her own possession is the only true legacy of the workshop tables. She moves with a fluid motion that reveals the sophisticated engineering Henry built into the joints before his mind broke completely. She uses his craft to defend a predator's crusade. Charlie looks at the giant mascot and recognizes the face she was supposed to inherit when her childhood concluded naturally. She sees the physical expression of her father's final madness, a monster that was built to hold his tears but now runs on a script of pure slaughter. She understands that her own body is a wall that keeps her father's soul from finding a rest outside the timeline. She chooses destruction. She uses a hidden blade inside the old tripod to pierce both chests simultaneously, locking their mechanisms together in a final embrace. The metal teeth grind through the synthetic skin, shorting out the circuit boards before Elizabeth can execute an escape protocol. The two girls fall to the floorboards as the power lines fail, their shared chassis turning into a heap of cold scrap that closes the family line in the dark. Section 6. What Charlotte Means, Part 35. Charlotte as the first protector at her core thematic level. Charlotte Emily stands as the moral antithesis to the man who drove the purple sedan. William Afton represents the ultimate form of selfish, predatory ego, an individual who shatters families purely to extend his own wretched existence. He looks at the local children and sees raw material for his experiments, using his corporate keys to hide his crimes behind the drywall panels. He's a study in chosen evil. Charlotte represents the ultimate form of selfless protection, a child who loses her life to violence but immediately uses her supernatural state to shield others. She doesn't focus on her own suffering or hunt the living out of a mindless impulse for vengeance, channeling her energy into an organized resistance. Her presence introduces a vital spark of genuine human morality into a universe defined by corporate indifference and industrial slaughter. Her first act inside the parts and service room establishes her as the true mind of the group, a spiritual mother who guides the missing children through the dark. She doesn't let them fade into the void, giving them their mask to anchor their fading energy against the corporate software. She turns their chaotic confusion into a targeted fight against the uniform, ensuring that the brand faces a consequence for its history. While Afton uses his engineering talent to automate murder through the Funtime line, Charlotte uses her possession to preserve the identity of the casualties. She keeps her own memory sharp to ensure that someone remembers the real names of the dead behind the stage curtains. She stands between the predator and the community, a silent watchman who refuses to leave the battlefield while the evil stays active in the shadows. Her defensive logic separates her style from the wild, tracking loops of the classic band, her movements guided by human empathy rather than a technical glitch. She understands the long scope of the timeline, tracking her killer through multiple locations and closures over 40 years. She doesn't seek a personal reward, accepting the scary image of the clown doll to serve as an advocate for the weak in the dark. Part 36. Charlotte and the theme of failed safety throughout every chapter of her story. Charlotte is intimately tied to the tragic theme of failed safety systems. The security puppet, the prize corner music box, the Lefty containment capsule, and Henry's final pizzeria trap all represent incredibly complex systems engineered by adults to protect children after it's already too late. These devices continuously fail to stop the raw malice of William Afton, proving a core truth within the series. Human evil cannot be cleanly managed or contained by corporate safety protocols or mechanical programming loops. The security machine Henry built in 1983 collapsed because of a pile of boxes, a technical oversight that left his daughter without a guard in the rain. The technology was flawless on paper, but it couldn't adapt to the simple cruelty of a playground joke or a sudden storm outside the door. The music box inside the 1987 venue is another mechanical airlock designed to pacify a ghost rather than solve the problem. The guard has to turn the handle continuously to keep Charlotte's spirit sleeping, a frantic routine that highlights the fragility of the building's defenses. The moment the chimes stop, the advanced facial recognition software fails, allowing her consciousness to override the system console completely. Henry's master plan in the final game relies on the creation of Lefty, a black bear suit built to hold his own daughter. He uses acoustic sedation files to paralyze her spirit, copying the stuffing methods that his partner used to conceal the bodies decades ago. The father has to become a technician who traps his family to ensure she reaches the furnace, a heartbreaking compromise. The fake restaurant itself is the ultimate expression of this failed security architecture, a building designed to look like a safe haven while operating as an incubator for a fire. Henry spends his remaining years trying to build a perfect cage that can hold the malice, using reversed ventilation pipes and iron shutters to block the exits. The maze is a monument to a lifetime of engineering errors that couldn't save a single life. Picture the irony of an empire that spends millions on criminal databases and automated tracking sensors, while a serial killer holds the executive keys. The company manufactures an illusion of perfect protection to secure the trust of local parents, turning their safety features into assets that the predator can manipulate from the control booth. The system breaks because the danger is human, a dark reality that no code can rewrite. Part 37. Why Charlotte is one of Five Nights at Freddy's saddest characters. Charlotte Emily's narrative trajectory stands as one of the most heartbreaking arcs in modern horror fiction. She's denied the basic right to a childhood, murdered out of pure spite by a trusted family friend before she can grow up. Her life ends in the mud behind her father's sanctuary, her body hidden beside the garbage containers while the festive music plays through the walls of the diner. She loses everything in a single night. She's forced to spend 40 years living inside a rusted, hollow clown doll, her consciousness compressed behind a plastic mask that she can't remove. While the other spirits are allowed to indulge in their blind rage or fade into a state of chaotic confusion, Charlotte is forced to remain perfectly, agonizingly sane. She remembers her father's face, her quiet home, and the night of the storm with a perfect clarity that hurts. This mental clarity is her greatest asset, but it's also her deepest source of permanent sorrow across the decades of her watch. She can't forget the face of her killer, or the feeling of the heavy door locking her out in the rain, forced to relive the betrayal every night. She has to maintain her focus while her companions degenerate into wild animals around the stage, their human names fading from their memory files. She carries the emotional weight of an entire generation of murdered children in her long arms, acting as a spiritual mother to those who were failed by adults. She doesn't get to play games or enjoy the parties she builds inside the hidden glitch levels, spending her afterlife organizing a resistance against a monster. Her protective drive turns into a permanent chain that keeps her tethers locked to the brand name. The tragedy deepens when you realize that her long watch requires her to witness the continuous expansion of William Afton's dark enterprise. She has to watch the company open new pizzerias, print promotional art featuring her mask, and harvest the remnant of fresh casualties under the corporate name. She's a silent guardian who stands in the trenches of a nightmare that her father's talent helped fund. Could you imagine being a small girl who has to fix the safety failures of an entire corporation while your father hides from his guilt in a distant town? She doesn't receive a word of comfort or a paternal embrace for 30 years, her presence processed as a simple hardware glitch by the cleanup crew on duty. She stays inside her prize box, a lonely protector who bides her time in the dark until the furnace doors close. Part 38. The complete legacy of Charlotte Emily. In conclusion, the entire multi-game timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's shifts entirely because a single child outside a restaurant wasn't saved in time. Had the children not blocked the puppet's box with heavy presents, or had Henry built a better waterproof seal on his prototype, Charlotte would have walked back inside the dining hall safely. Afton would have been caught by the local authorities before his psychopathy could mature. The haunted legacy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would have never existed without that initial execution in the mud of 1983. 5 families would keep their children, the hidden safe rooms would remain empty of bodies, and the spring-lock suits would rot on their racks without holding a human soul. Her quiet death is the singular origin point that defined a generation of horror across the community. Her choice to enter the metal turned a simple security guard simulator into an epic saga of grief, protection, and spiritual redemption. She provided the anchor that kept the missing children from disappearing into the void, turning their individual pain into an organized resistance against the uniform. She wrote her name on the history of the brand using her own life force as a permanent ink. The final fire in the simulator venue represents the ultimate conclusion of the system she managed from her prize counter for 40 years. By gathering every remaining asset into a single room, her father's trap cleared the registry of Afton's portfolio, reducing the silver skeletons to a silent mound of ash. It's a cleansing inferno that wouldn't function without her presence in the collection grid. However, the emergence of the modern era introduces a haunting question mark over the perfect peace her father promised her in his final monologue. The digital reconstruction of the old venues and the rise of the Mimic program prove that the corporate legacy continues to stain the earth long after the boilers cooled. The virus may adapt to a fresh format, leaving her watch vulnerable to a reactivation. Imagine looking at the empty concrete seal over the pit and realizing that the code can still copy the patterns of her killer without his presence. The new characters move on paths that mimic the old hunts, their software infected by a virus that ignores the final accounting Henry executed. Charlotte's legacy remains a light that stays near the boundary, a ghost that can't rest while the rot is active in the complex.